listening to another remote episode of Not Good Enough, an inadequate response to inadequate responses. I'm Mitch Alexander.
I'm Tom McLean.
I'm Tom Lang.
And I'm Evie.
I worry that if you keep introducing them as a remote episode and the lockdown goes on for another 6 months, we're going to have you're listening to finally back to a normal episode 71. Back to normal from episode 11.
It's I was thinking about that before. It's interesting to think that literally across the world, archaeologists will forever have a timestamp of when each individual area was hit hard by corona, because you'll just notice from 1 week to the next, the podcast audio quality just shifts instantly. It's just like everyone's now recording remotely, so it's just this really nice high fidelity sound after spending $10,000 on a podcast studio for your business, to everyone going back to their headphone mics, recording onto a phone and sending the file like, I don't know, shit, I don't know.
That's pretty optimistic on two counts, Mitch.
Yep.
A, that there will be archaeologists, and B, that any digital media will survive.
The archaeologists that we're going to have are going to be 80 million years from now, you're sort of like bug archaeologists who naturally chitter in ones and zeros anyway, so they're just innately...
Yeah. There was the CD age, and then after that, they just put everything on the cloud, which we can only imagine means they burned it, because none of that remains.
So,
and then one day the archaeologists will just find the one Amazon data store and they'll just be like, oh, it's everything. Okay.
But anyway, to the archaeologists that are listening, the podcasters aren't okay.
So in Australian news, Australia is still on fire in a very minor sense, which is nice. There's still tiny little spot fires and bushfires all over the country, so even though we're all locked up inside, keeping ourselves and our loved ones safe, worth noting that climate change hasn't stopped. But we're a no doomerism podcast, so
it will stop. And we're gonna fucking get it. Look out, climate change. We're coming for you.
If you're wanting a bit of a primer on why we're not going to be doing the whole this virus is the world cleaning itself, that's because it's eco-fascism, and we covered that last episode. So if this is your first one, you can go back to last episode and find out why these are two distinct challenges that are running concurrently, and why we need to think of them seriously as essentially an overall problem for humanity to face, not one small problem fixing a larger one.
Yeah, and also, let's be honest, a virus like this, while it seems pretty nasty at the time, it's a speed bump in terms of, humanity and the environment. People like to jump to conclusions and go, oh, this is going to change everything, this is going to change the world. Yeah, hopefully it will change some stuff, but it's not going to do it by itself. We have to use this chance to change things in the right way, because if left to its own devices, we're just going to go back to exactly normal.
Trying to hopefully focus on a bit of corona adjacent or non-corona news as best as we can. Starting off with the Liberal federal government putting through a new funding bill for private schools to the tune of $3.4 billion. That's pretty good.
Well, we need private schools, Mitch.
That's what?
Well, we need private schools.
Otherwise, it's a bad plan.
Our rich people children will have to socialize with the poor people children, and that's...
We cannot have that.
Even in times of plague, we can't have the rich people children socializing with the poor people children, Mitch. It's no good. It can't happen.
So, essentially what it seems to be is yet more of the sort of fiddling that they do on the back end. I'm not 100% all over this exact proposal, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem to be one of those issues where they're just giving $3.4 billion. They are sending it across with an amendment to a different amendment to another amendment to a different sort of spot.
The payment that got passed in Parliament this week was $3.4 billion over the next 10 years, and it's supposed to be an attempt to redistribute low-income families over a bunch of private schools in order to diversify their base. So it's not just all rich kids going to all these schools. Allegedly, that's the plan. But it's a trap. It's basically just a gift to say, hey, we know we got to be seen to do, like we're doing something about this, but here's some more money that can pay for your scholarship so you can have some poor kids there. What's that for? It's just a gift for them attempting to look like they're doing the right thing. And
Yeah.
it means nothing because the schools are not getting any sort of cost from it anyway.
That's crazy also because there is a system in place to allow poorer people to access good schooling. It should be the public school system. That's already how you get taxpayer money into quality education. Put more money into that and get rid of the private schools, and then everybody can have the same good quality education. It works for bloody Sweden.
It's that Liberal Party logic of well, I mean, the private schools are doing really well and the public schools are struggling. And so we want to encourage the ones that are doing really well and not encourage the ones that are struggling. So whatever the private schools are doing, they're crushing it. Let's give them the money so they can spend it well rather than giving it to the poor schools. There's no logic of oh, they need that money and they can't operate as well if they don't have it. It's not a sort of switch that goes off in the sorry to generalize, but I'm going to fucking do it, in the liberal mind that just doesn't have that thing of but what if you don't have enough money? It's not a thought that happens to them.
In that cash register they have for a brain.
If I go out for a bike ride, never am I worried about what if the pavement turns into lava? It's just not a thing that occurs to me because that's never happened, and there's no situation that I can foresee where it will happen to me. And so that's the sort of thing. They're just well, I mean, we're rich, and so we never think about not having money. So they don't fund the places that need it because they're no, the money's the thing that you give as a treat, not as the thing that you supply a need.
It's almost like you were asking to nationalise the private schools there. I just wanted to point out that seemed like something that you were implying should be done.
Well, exactly. And I think if the government is giving money to someone to do a service for the general population, it sounds like the best way to do that is just, hey, maybe you're now nationalised. Maybe we've half nationalised the private school system. That'd be pretty good. And honestly, this is very similar to some of the things we're seeing right now with there are private hospitals saying, oh no, now we're not going to be able to do business because we've cancelled elective surgeries. Are you going to give us some money so we don't shut down? Yeah, absolutely we should do that. We should give them some money to buy them out so that they now belong to the government and can actually help the population not die from coronavirus.
Yeah, I saw that. The idea coming out that private hospitals through Victoria have given 24 hours notice that if they don't get bailed out soon, they're not going to be able to help with coronavirus. You seem like a pretty shit hospital. Maybe we should just let the administrators of the government run you then. What do you? As I was reading a little bit about it, and they essentially, they get paid by maintaining this nice baseline of very easy elective surgeries coming in, rich people paying for outpatient services from complications from their own elective surgery, and all this sort of shit that just keeps this upper level money in, money out sort of revolving door happening. And then they've gone, we've only got 24 hours before we have to shut our doors completely. It's all right, well, fuck off then. We will fill you with doctors and nurses that know how to actually do something worthwhile to the fucking community. You're a hospital.
If you're a hospital that can't stay afloat during a global health crisis, then it sounds like something's wrong with your business model, because that should be all hands on deck for every form of medical everything ever.
It's also such a trivial thing to nationalize, where it's oh, you're about to fold as a business? Okay, let's just let that happen, and then 24 hours from now, let's be shit, there's a pandemic on. I hope that somewhere we can find a big hospital-shaped building that isn't being used, and a whole bunch of unemployed nurses and doctors, and maybe even some reception staff. And if they already know their way around the hospital, that'd be great.
Yeah, honestly, if your private business is not functioning that badly that you need the government to pay money to keep it all afloat, absolutely we'll pay money, but now the government owns it. That's how business works. And if your business isn't working to the point where you need government handouts, sounds like you're not a business, you're a government funded thing.
So just of note, going back to the private school funding as well, the fact was that they pushed this through relatively quickly, and obviously using the cover of a pandemic as they want to do, let no good tragedy not be an opportunity, blah, blah, blah. It's interesting to me because they put it through so quickly, and they didn't want to postpone it until they were sitting again, and they really wanted the money to go through, which is interesting given that most schools are going to be shut down for a while anyway, so I don't know how that affects the funding, but I can imagine that hidden somewhere in all of the different legalese throughout the rest of like the proposal, there's going to be something of like, oh, well, look, if school's not sitting, you can just take what you would expect to be the amount of poor people you would get in, and from an estimate, we can give you some money based off, your future projections of poor people.
But also, you can fire your teachers if you need to.
Just by virtue of the plan, it seems like a rort. Like, we're going to give all these schools money just so you can get in poor people. Like, imagine just on the face of that itself, the principals and the administrators of these schools that are likely involved in that kind of, skullduggery.
Yeah, and honestly, what they could do is just be like, hey, you guys are making mad cash. We'll force you to take a certain amount of free students.
I was listening to the 7am podcast this week. They were doing a whole series about just the different effects of the coronavirus and, what's going on in Australia there. And one of them, they were talking about this incredible idea, which was like, we're going to have a lot of unused, a lot of unemployed, construction workers and that sort of thing as the sort of economy starts to crash. And we'll also have a lot of government buildings that are not being used that need maintenance, but you can't maintain them because that would require, say, shutting down that school so that the construction crew can come in to maintain it. And they're like, we should be doing that now. We should be taking advantage of the fact that all these government businesses are having to close and get people out to actually do a really much needed infrastructure upgrade.
Holy shit. Yeah, upgrading the schools and houses when the asbestos thing comes through. You don't go back to the pre-1950s ramshackle bullshit that you had. Take the time to do some cool shit to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, rad. Except the workers should probably stay inside as much as is possible. But
well, yeah, I mean, if you've got one painter in that one room for that day, that's okay. He's not seeing anyone.
Yeah, you can still run these things relatively safely as long as you take the adequate precautions. Or I'm hoping that we see, as coronavirus moves forward, small squads of elite immune people who can, daywalkers, who can get stuff done.
Just I'm just picturing some fucking comedians desperately wanting their Melbourne show to go ahead, and they've already gotten corona a month ago, so they're just no, I can do it, I'm still good, I'm a hero.
As long as we only get audience who also have only had coronavirus,
yeah.
The jokes will be how much did that suck?
Crashing just straight into this completely stratified society of vulnerable and immune people, and the immune people are allowed to go out and go to shops, and the immune people have to stay inside, and they
it's friggin' the time machine.
The lockdown works, and a whole bunch of people never get the virus, but the stratification remains in place. It's just you have to stay at home forever until you catch it, and then you're allowed.
Goddamn munis.
Like vampires. Every now and then a coronavirus person drinks the blood of a non-coronavirus person, and then they turn, and then they're able to join that society, but they have to leave all their loved ones behind.
Lang, you are fundamentally misunderstanding how this virus is transferred.
I assume it involves drinking blood.
We don't support this advice.
Wait, are you saying that you can't get it from drinking blood? Because that changes my weekend plans fundamentally.
You know what? You probably can't.
Probably. Boil the blood first.
But it's hard to get that blood while staying outside the 1.5 meter radius.
In better news, Queensland is getting an absolutely massive new wind farm, which is fantastic and genuinely unexpected news to be coming out. It seems like the lefty equivalent of sneaking news through a pandemic. The Liberal Party are giving a whole bunch of taxpayer dollars to private schools, and progressives are just quietly putting up wind farms out in the bush, hoping no one notices.
That said, this is what's this? The Queensland state government is presumably a big player in this. And this is the government who's also super pro coal. And so they're probably sneaking it through so no one notices how environmentally friendly they're being. If people knew there were 400 jobs in wind farms, the whole house of cards would come down.
We're going to have to build some real big holes to put these wind farms in, we promise. We're going to keep going. We're going to do it.
It's going to be the largest onshore wind farm one of the largest onshore wind farms in the world, and bigger than the next 3 operational wind farms in Australia combined. Potentially 200 new jobs. So it's like Queensland's doing their own Green New Deal by accident.
Turns out the free market understands that bloody wind and renewables are just ridiculously cost efficient. Man,
Yeah.
1,000
Yeah, I do wonder-
megawatts.
It's huge. Like it's actually to the point where it could there could be an oversupply in Queensland and they could sell it on to other states.
Man, it's almost like there's a future in renewables.
Yeah, I genuinely wonder if we're going to see more of this coming from, like, even right-wing governments all around the world are having to enact fairly progressive policies just to make sure the world doesn't collapse. I wonder how much we're going to see in the next 5 years or so of these, like, outwardly very pro-coal, very fossil fuel governments just, like, sneaking through renewable stuff and then, like, coming up with really bad excuses after the fact. Like, this idea of it just being like, oh, we are very much involved with gas. Minister, why then did you get 400 square kilometers of solar panels put through us? Oh, it doesn't matter. It's like, because they know what has to fucking happen. But they're still going to keep talking a big game about fossil fuels. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I've always said so, but like the biggest baffling thing to me when it comes to like lack of adaptation of clean energy sources is that it can be very lucrative. So all these people who are involved in fossil fuels and oil production, they know it's lucrative because, like, you know, people like Shell still have arms of investigation when it comes to green energy. At this point, like, it's safe to acknowledge that it's just a moral difference. They choose to hold on to these older frames of, you know, non-renewable resources because they just don't want to be proven wrong.
So what it actually often is, and we are going to see a lot more investment, and we're currently seeing a lot more investment in renewables in Australia and all over the world. A lot of it is coming from the private sector. Because the private sector, if you're an energy company like AGL and you can build a new power plant of any sort, when you run the numbers, renewables are by far the safest long-term investment and even short-term investment. It's often, they're doing that despite governments. Like, you've got private companies building these huge renewable installations in Australia despite massive government, like, support for fossil fuels. Just because even with those massive government support for fossil fuels are still an insane investment at this point. You can't get banks to get on board. There is no long-term plan for them. The only time it happens is when you have people who are so sunk cost on fossil fuels. And that's like, you're Adani or Clive Palmer or whatever. That building new coal mines, like, is worth it, even though it's such an insane investment. And so companies like Shell, at this point, would probably love to be entirely renewable, because it would make them not look like the monsters they are. And also, it's good money. But they have so much sunk cost. They are operating an entire fossil fuel international pipeline, metaphorically and physically. And they can't get out of that. They own all of the fossil fuel infrastructure. And if at any point they decide to get out of fossil fuels, no one's buying that off them. That is a trillions of dollars of oil rigs that now no one will buy.
They've got fast forward 20 years and it's Shell, renewable energy, and long form water slides.
Water slide your way across the Trans-Siberian Ocean.
Oh man, I've just had this image in my head of just like ghost refineries just offshore, just like with no people in them. And like, you know how like urban explorers, they like explore like abandoned buildings and stuff just to...
You sell them to libertarians.
Yeah, Shell becomes one of the biggest players on Airbnb.
Hey, do you want to start a new world away from the laws of God and man? We've got an oil refinery we can sell you. Now, the problem with that is it's not as simple as it looks, because an oil refinery, you can't just shut it off. It's still tapped into a high-pressure oil well. And decommissioning those things is mad difficult because you got to somehow stop that high pressure oil from just coming out. So yeah.
Are you telling me that in 2020, the year of our Lord 2020, we are still using technology to get oil out of the ground that is based off the idea that we never want it to stop, nor can it be stopped. And they literally just dig into it, get the pump going, and then the pressure just keeps going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really high pressure in there. It's really hard to get it out any other way.
You've seen the videos where people hit oil and it spurts hundreds of meters into the air. Like, once you put an oil pipe down into an oil well, the trick is stopping it.
Yeah, but I thought that was like fiction, like because I've seen those oil spurts up into the air, but I've also seen it with like Toothless Joe and his overall with one button missing doing a jig near it. Like I didn't think it was real.
There Will Be Blood was a documentary. Daniel Day-Lewis really found oil.
We should hook the oil geysers up to just like a water wheel and use oil like to generate electricity that way.
And then just let it back out into the ocean.
Yeah, just put it wherever. It's just oil. It's natural.
All right, we've gone off topic. In a time of like a pandemic, because this is very much a health problem, it's wild how much governments are like, okay guys, we've got to think about the jobs. This virus infects jobs. We've got to keep the jobs safe. 70-year-olds, they come and go, but jobs are forever. And you've got governments like mostly friggin' America, Australia, the UK, to different degrees saying, well, obviously we need to save lives. Can we somehow do this in a way that doesn't change anything that we're doing? Because right now the things that we're doing are making money for people, and they're keeping the stock market up. And if the stock market goes down, the Koch brothers' hearts will stop.
One of them's already dead, Lane.
The Koch brother.
What's really confusing at the moment is that there's been a lot of, we've talked a lot about how the messaging from the government on coronavirus and its impact has been mixed is probably too nice a word. Confusing,
Evil.
convoluted, evil, cannot condense it down to 3 minutes and goes on for like 30-minute presses at 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah, it's like he's bloody podcasting.
Yeah, just inadequate response, honestly. So the biggest thing that has happened that we've noticed is that people have been steeled down from what Scott Morrison has deemed non-essential services, but there's still a lot of confusion about what is an essential service, because some things are deemed, necessary to be open, like hairdressers or pharmacies or Woolworths, but what makes an essential business? And Scott Morrison's response was, well, you're a worker, therefore you're essential to the economy. That doesn't help.
Yeah, it's so annoying. He just is totally incapable of saying, some jobs, we don't need them.
Well, it's because he can't conceptualize of a higher purpose than keeping money going around and keeping shares up. Everything else, like healthcare, is just to keep workers alive. And firefighters are just there so that rich houses don't burn down. It's just to keep money moving.
I am 100% convinced that we cannot overstate the influence of either his marketing background or his religious background as to
Completely
why he
agree.
speaks like this.
Completely
Because,
agree.
I know some marketers and they are all scum. They are the worst. And I used to be involved in like a Christian youth group, like a Friday night youth group and then like the Sunday church and whatnot. And I can 100% hear a youth group leader or even like a minister of like a funky new age church talking about like, guys, we're all essential. Hey, come on now. We're talking about essential jobs and non-essential jobs. And look, if you're keeping the economy afloat, then boy, howdy, you're an essential worker. It's like, no, not at all.
Oh, God loves
You're
you.
essential. You're essential to the flow of capital. You're not essential to anyone's life. You're not essential to anyone's well-being. The work that you do isn't good in any way. I make money in a non-essential job and I'm proud of the fact. How lucky am I that I live in a world where I can make money non-essentially? But for fuck's sake, if you have to close down businesses, don't mix up the messaging with what you think is a feel-good message for workers, because no one fucking likes you anyway. You already fucked it with the fire response. It's not going to work, mate.
He's torn between making like a moral judgment on what is an essential person, but he doesn't know how to convey, because he's so incapable of conveying a coherent response at the best of times. He can't do it in a way where he knows that, okay, I have to make sure that people don't panic, but also I need to tell them that some things are going to shut down and things are going to get bad. And because he's just so afraid of the implication that might mean, he just fucks it up every single time. And so now, like, we're getting to the point where people are starting to question that. Like, even people who wouldn't normally consider themselves political. Like, I see, like, a lot of my friends who don't necessarily engage with politics that often, who are like, okay, I work at some random retail shop, a bookshop, or an op shop. Why am I still open? He talks about, like, it's really important that people keep all this distancing and everything, but I don't need to be here. Why am I still here?
I disagree that he's just doing it to be comforting. I think he honestly can't admit that any part of the economy is not important. Because if he says, hey, we don't actually need bookshops or the bottle shops or whatever to survive, suddenly he's admitting that we can run a more streamlined, trimmed down economy. And a lot of people are doing useless jobs, which runs counter to the entire philosophy of the party.
Sorry, I should clarify. He's not actually trying to be comforting. He just knows that he should be because he's a leader, but he can't do it.
My take is he's always got his advisors and his poll numbers and stuff just always running in his head. And so whenever he's in front of the camera, he's like, so, Mr. PM, which jobs are essential? And he's like, oh, shit, I can't piss off the op shop workers, so they're essential. I mean, everyone's essential, aren't they? Please keep voting for me.
Yeah, I can totally see a situation where it's just like he's got his notes prepared before he goes out. Non-essential workers, like tattooists, hairdressers, beauticians, and then it goes out there and like one person's just like, what shops are shutting down because they're not essential? And it's just his personality kicks in, and he's like his desire to be ever pleasing and politic his way to the top just kicks in. He's just like, no, you're all beautiful children of God, and we need all of you. You're all guiding angels of light, and we need all of your dollars. Please don't not vote for me. Fucking loser.
I reckon I'm putting this out there as just it's a new meme, but like, okay, so Scott Morrison. He didn't expect to win the election because there's that whole narrative of like, all the rorts and stuff, which is still, by the way, absolutely in play. Nobody's apologized or resigned for any of the obvious corruption cases. Just because there's a pandemic doesn't mean that they're suddenly good people with a bunch of integrity. No, absolutely still going on. But so they did all these rorts because they were expecting to lose the seats anyway, and they just wanted to cash as many checks as they could before they weren't in power.
Yep.
And then they won the election. And then there's scrutiny on Scott Morrison's handling of the bushfire crisis. There's the scrutiny on Scott Morrison's corruption. And now there's the scrutiny on the corona stuff. He didn't even expect to be in this job in the first place. He's been fired from every other job that he's had because he's a fucking mendacious idiot, right? And so he's in front of all these press conferences. He knows that his position is insecure. And so that sort of constant waffling and constant hedging of every conceivable concept is coming from a place of deep insecurity where he's just like, oh my God, all I want is to I just only want to still be Prime Minister. Please. Just whenever you hear him talking, just mentally overdub it with him just being like, please. I only want to be Prime Minister. I only want to have power over. Please. I don't. Please. Like that. And that's Scott Morrison. That's his soul.
He's like quite like Trump, where he just thought, oh, it's going to be cruisy. I'm going to be Prime Minister, but nothing's going to happen. Meanwhile, like bushfires and pandemic in like the first 3 months of the year, he's like, oh, fuck. Oh, also, the one thing...
So...
It's the monkey paw. He wished to be Prime Minister of Australia for 1 year.
The monkey paw curled.
The monkey paw's just got one middle finger up.
In a previous episode, we've mentioned that everyone who's listening to this, and tell your friends as well, you should pay attention what politicians in particular do in this situation of crisis. We talked about it even during the bushfires as well. And one thing that you should pay attention to is something that we alluded to when we were talking about nationalising the hospitals earlier on, which is consider who's getting a bailout from the government and what they're doing for their staff. So I found this person on Twitter. Her handle is Rosie A. Nice. She's compiling a list of major companies who are standing down their employees who've either received a government bailout already or huge profits in the last financial year. Now, this is particularly important when it comes to airlines, which is the first to receive the bailout. Qantas has stood down 20,000 workers in the last week, which is the majority of its workforce, and they received $715 million in a rescue package from the government days before that stand down. Now, wasn't the rescue package supposed to help those workers stay in their jobs? They make billions of dollars of profit in the last financial year. And yet here we are that, people are out of jobs. They don't have any guarantee they'll get them back when they go back. And there's a really long list of these companies, not just airlines, who, make billions of dollars in profit, and yet they're all turning down all their employees. So where's the disconnect? Where is all that money going?
Yeah. So this is like the government's, one of their major stimulus kind of support packages. And, you guys may be slightly more across the details of this than me, but it's giving a huge pile of money to businesses, or they're reducing you're allowed to claim your employee's salary back on tax to some large amount. But that seems insane because they're hoping businesses will pass that on to their employees. That's not going to happen for casual employees. It's not going to happen for employees who've already been sacked. And it's not going to happen to employees of businesses that have to close anyway. Because if you're not making an income, if you're running a friggin', my example, an education center or anything like that, which has had to close down for an extended period of time, you're not going to be paying your employees anything. And if you are meant to be paying your employees when you're not actually running a business, why doesn't the government just give the friggin' money directly to the employees? I mean, we know why, because they don't want to give money directly to anybody. They consider a business to be the smallest unit of the economy, and anything smaller than that is a parasite.
Just consider the context that this is happening in, and not just the context of the pandemic, obviously, but the broader context where the government is trying to sort of ostensibly help the working person by giving a big bunch of money to the companies that are employing them, and then sort of assuming that the companies will pass that, big bunch of money onto their employees. If you go back and listen to our episodes of the podcast, before we started talking about coronavirus every fucking episode, what were we talking about? An epidemic of wage theft. That was like 4 episodes in a row was just like, oh man, this company not paying their employees what they should be. This one also not paying what they should be. But like just every single one. And so the idea that like the government is somehow not aware of this problem, considering it was the major news in between the bushfires and the pandemic, like what the fuck?
So the thing to remember about Qantas and all of these issues as they are happening is that they've stood down 20,000 workers, and this was after they received a $715 million rescue package. And the other thing I want to stress when we talk about $1.3 billion underlying profit before tax, that is profit. That's on top of things. They increased their wealth by $1.3 billion. And yet again, we will never have people talking about how companies should have been putting aside money for a rainy day. It's just the casual worker. But regardless, the point remains, this relates to what we were just talking about before with Scott Morrison being a fucking chud about this whole thing, is that if he calls for a massive shutdown, if he calls for places to be, for workers to go home on a government decree, then there is some issue with who pays the workers what, how they stay in their housing, how they continue to afford food, rent, and the rest of it. But if you do not call for that type of shutdown yet, then we have these situations where Qantas isn't on the hook for getting rid of people. Because they that this industry sort of shut down, but the whole place hasn't shut down, so we've got this middle ground where the longer everything stays open, the more we can have workers getting fucked out of what they should be getting, because then they just have to sort of go for Centerlink because, oh, you're unemployed. Is it because of coronavirus? Oh, who can say? Maybe Qantas already had this thing on the books. Not sure.
Hairdressers are an excellent example of that, because this is a business that is employing vast numbers of people, and they are relying entirely on people coming to a shop and getting their hair cut. And obviously a lot of people are not getting haircuts right now because I'm not comfortable getting a haircut right now. I don't want to sit and have someone else breathe on the back of my head for a half hour or whatever. But Scott Morrison has refused to say, we're closing hairdressers, despite the leaders of big hairdressing, unions or companies or whatever being like, you need to shut us down Because if you say, we need to shut down, then we can put systems in place to help these hairdressers who are now being fired or their businesses. You know, if you're a hairdresser and you run a small hairdressing business and you're not getting any people walking in the door, what the fuck are you supposed to do right now? But you're still considered to be a business that is meant to be staying open?
Paying rent, damn it.
It's insane.
Yeah, that's... I mean, I'm sure everyone's got at least one message from a business that they use that's just like, hey, we're shutting down today because we don't know whether we're shutting down. We are going to have to shut down in a couple of days anyway. So, you know, we're shutting up shop now so that we actually have some certainty. Like I've got maybe 4 different messages from different companies that I use that are of that same nature.
Yeah, it's this whole, we want to keep things open as long as we can to help the economy out. What that actually does is create so much uncertainty that it harms the economy more than it would if you just said, we're shutting it all down, we'll start it up in 6 months.
Yeah, so that's going back to what Lang was saying about the government acting as if they want to just mitigate what's happening right now as opposed to stopping everything. And a wage guarantee essentially does that. Like, especially like, I think the wage guarantee they're floating at the moment is only like a 20 or 30% guarantee, which is essentially nothing. And if you're passing on that money to the employer, as we talked about, there is the risk that that's just going to go straight. That's rife for abuse anyway. Why does the government think that people can't get that money in their own pockets straight away? It would be so easy to implement. It would be just through the same way they give us back our tax refunds, have it in the same bank account. It could happen over the space of like a week, maybe 2 weeks. But there is a lot to be said for why they're choosing these sort of stopgap measures instead. And also we should have a look at who is actually supporting a wage guarantee as well. At the moment, I think I've been critical in the past of how the unions were very slow to act, and their first sort of demand was, 2 weeks extra sick leave, which is, again, it's like it's missing the forest for the trees. It doesn't account for anything else.
It's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah. So now they and the Labour Party are supporting the wage subsidy. They're also supporting eviction freezes. But again, this is just missing all the fundamental problems that are in place. We need to have, actual money in people's pockets to make sure that they survive. There needs to be rent freezes to make sure that, people... You don't want to just stop people getting kicked out. You want to freeze the actual element of cost that's involved in having a life.
Yeah, you don't want the pandemic to wrap up and the lockdown to finish, and now everyone's just suddenly in $15,000 worth of debt or something to their landlord.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason why they're not doing any of that sort of stuff is because, like Lang said, the smallest economic unit is the small business, and I'm 100% convinced that what they would be happy with would be to have the smallest viable unit of small businesses still around, so they could fudge the numbers, keep everything going, and they have no one employed, no one's on the books, but they manage to pay their rent, they manage to stay technically in business through the shutdown, and then all of a sudden the pandemic's over, and they've got all these unemployed people that they can suddenly now hire, because if they give the money to the business doesn't have to shut down, and fuck the worker can get employed after the fact. That's what they want to have happen. That's their vision of a safe Australia after this pandemic, is businesses able to hire from the mass amount of unemployed people.
Honestly, there's a lot of analogies to what happens in America where you get your healthcare entirely through your employer. And obviously that's even worse because now you've got friggin' a global pandemic. Obviously a lot of people need to get things tested, get things treated, be able to access healthcare, but also you've shut down all the businesses. They've laid off all their employers. Now those employers don't have healthcare unless they keep going to work. It's insane. And it's along the same thing. It's saying that if you don't have a job, you don't deserve healthcare. But now we're in a system where the health of any given individual is reliant on the health of the whole society. But we haven't put anything in place to safeguard that.
So talking about the unemployed and the issues that we have with businesses laying off people, we've also seen Centerlink, which is our national social welfare provider, inundated with literally tens of thousands of requests for unemployment claims when the first set of lockdowns happened, way back in the day. 6 days ago. To the
Not
point
just tens of
where
thousands, 150,000 people on that first day.
150,000
They
people
somehow didn't
on the
predict.
first day signed up for unemployment after the government decided to shut down a whole bunch of businesses. Now, I'm no big city fancy lawyer man, but I would assume that the government has a rough estimate of the employment levels and numbers in the country and what their shutting down of businesses would do and how many people would sign up to Centerlink. But they fucking didn't, and the Centerlink website went down to the point where, for no good reason, Stuart Robert first claimed that it was a DDoS attack, that hackers hacked Centerlink and shut it down, as opposed to it clearly being an...
Yeah, we said we'd give them welfare. We didn't take it.
There was a good reason, though. He lied. That was his reason. There's no good reason, but the reason is that he lied.
it's just insane that. Again, it's that thing. I think McLean's right when talking about all of our politicians being like, "Oh, please, I don't want to lose an election. Please, I want to stay here." It's like, what happened to the infrastructure that people rely on to have money to buy food? It's like, it was hackers. It's like, no, you just didn't do your fucking job.
We've talked about Stuart Robert before. He's the one who has a new political scandal every time it's his birthday. Like, he, registered a business under the name of his parents without them knowing so that he could get some tax benefit. He spent $30,000 a month on his internet bills. It's this guy. It's that same guy.
Stuart Robert is one of our...
recurring character.
Yeah, he's the season 2 villain, for sure. He's just a piece of shit, this guy. And he's spent years fucking up Centerlink, and like he's, been at the helm for the whole Robodebt saga, which, by the way, is largely still going on. They've stopped pursuing these things, but there's been no official cancellation of these debts.
No, there hasn't been a cancellation, but it is very likely that they are about to lose a class action.
Yes, I saw that. That's beautiful news.
That was taken against them for Robodebt, which is fantastic news.
Which means Robodebt will cost the country a huge amount of money just for fucking about chasing up poor people for a couple of dollars.
It's going to cost them $500 million potentially in money that they have to pay back on the Robodebt, which, in terms of a stimulus package during the coronavirus, isn't bad.
I got to say that if you compare it to ancient Rome, where the emperors would still spend money maintaining their colosseums and stuff in which they made poor people fight and kill each other for entertainment, it's the same math. Where they're just obviously we had to bail them out afterwards, but man, that was a pretty good couple years where we were forcing them to kill themselves.
But the Colosseum provided entertainment to thousands of Roman citizens.
As a side effect.
And stands the test of time as a monumental structure and architectural wonder of the world.
You're just talking about the AFL here, okay? When it comes to the measures that they've decided to help job seekers for, so they've doubled the New Start, but that's not starting till the end of April. And in addition to that, only just this week they've decided to discontinue mutual obligations, but they didn't officially cancel it until 9 p.m. on Friday night. So they really buried that lead super hard as possible. Jeremy Poxon had been chasing it up with the Department of Community Services.
So, mutual obligations, just for anyone who doesn't know, because there's a lot of people listening who may never have actually gone through the Centerlink system, and they might be about to. But mutual obligations were the bullshit things that you would hear about where you would have to go to an employment service provider or something like that, and they would set you up with a job plan, and all of those words have a capital letter in front of it too, so you know it's bullshit. They're not just they're not the actual things, they are proper nouns of those, an employment service provider, it was just essentially a bunch of people in an office would look at you and go, look, there's no jobs, and they would just get you to apply for shit, and if you got a job, they would get money. They offer fucking nothing. They are the worst. They are the employment equivalent of real estate agents. They are scum. They're fucked. But mutual obligations mutual obligations would require you to say, almost like when you were going for your driver's license, put down a number of hours of how many times you drove this week. In a mutual obligation, you would go, oh, I approached this employer, and this employer with my resume. I did some training, which will not help me in any single way. It's essentially, you had to do busy work before you can get money to live on. So it's almost like it's a moral thing. It's like, we're not just going to give you money for free. You've got to do something. You scum. You have to work.
It's proving that you deserve it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's proving that you deserve it somehow. And like every time that I've been on Centerlink and I had to do my mutual obligations and I eventually got a job and I had to go into the office and tell them, they're like, hey, can you sign this form here just to say that you've got a job? And I'm like, I'm not stupid. I know that they want me to sign that form so they can get money for credit to get that job. It's like, no, I just did that myself. I went on seek.com.au and I got that job for myself. You had no part in helping me in this.
Yeah, but in our defense, you went on seek.com.au because you came into us and we were like, you should apply for a job.
And we didn't give you money, which made you desperate.
Thanks, Serena Russo.
Yeah, because these job seeker agencies like Serena Russo and stuff, they're not small companies. They make a lot of money.
Yeah, they're really good friends with the Liberal parties too. It may shock you to know. Weird.
Yeah, it's just another example of like the Liberal Party figuring out a way to give huge amount of money to their friends, and it's just like, oh well, people are suffering, but you know that's a side effect that we're happy to wear that.
But it is good as the messaging has been slow to get out, but mutual obligations have actually been cancelled as of the 27th of March. The official announcement came out at 9 p.m. Friday night, and fucking no one knows about it. So if you're in any way involved in mutual obligations and stuff, they have been cancelled. You don't have to do them, and if a job provider tells you that you do, you can just, you have the not good enough pod seal of approval to just tell them they're scum, and also tell them that they're scum entirely independent of coronavirus and mutual obligations.
You guys are scum, but now you're scum. That's in our way. I want to really quickly circle around to that thing of not bringing in this new Centerlink bonus till the end of April, because the speed of government is very different from the speed of a virus. And if you look at the stats and you say, we're going to keep going on our trajectory or even improve somewhat, by the end of April, we're looking at somewhere around 40 to 50,000 cases. Currently, we're at about 4,000, which puts us somewhere about twice as bad as the UK. So we do not have time to fuck about waiting for this thing to get approved. We need emergency
funds. As Jeremy correctly observed as well when he was doing all the work and trying to find out whether the mutual obligations were cancelled, they're due to return at the moment on the very same day that the job seeker allowance with the extra corona supplement kicks in. So just to have that little extra evil touch. So yeah, it's only for a couple of weeks.
Oh, so only in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, Jeremy, when you mentioned Jeremy Poxon on Twitter, fucking fantastic dude, really good advocate
amazing
for the unemployed and the Australian Unemployed Workers Union, which you should join.
All right, let's talk about how shit of a job the government is doing at managing quarantine, considering their national identity is based on strong borders. There's just been a bunch of reports this week and news stories that have broken out of the government just letting people who are infected, and basically the government appearing to just not get that the virus is contagious, much less the fact that the virus is contagious even before you have symptoms. So, like, their messaging around, like, stay at home is always stay at home if you feel sick. Which, that means that you're out and about. If you've got the virus, you're going to have, 4 days or something where you're contagious, but you don't show any symptoms, you don't feel sick, you're out and about infecting anybody that you run into. It's so stupid, but they're really showing it with, like, we see the ABC's reported, like, these huge crowds at, like, Sydney Airport, which people, like, waiting to get through immigration and baggage check and that sort of thing, all, like, really packed in quite closely together. We've got the cruise ships all landing and just, like, letting, huge swaths of people out who are known to be infected now.
I feel like we should really talk about a little bit more about the this particular cruise ship in question. It's the Ruby Princess, which arrived in Australia, in Sydney, on the 19th of March. There was a specific ban that the government put in on the 18th of March, where they cited the Ruby Princess as being exempt from it, and which docked the next day, and they just let everyone off. And so far from that, all the passengers on that ship, 293 passengers have tested positive so far. It's doubling, like, it's seemingly every single day.
And the Ruby Princess sounds a lot like the Diamond Princess, which isn't a coincidence. They're owned by the same company. They're sister ships. The Diamond Princess being the friggin' plague ship.
See, I wouldn't mind, like, if we have to quarantine people, chuck them on a cruise ship, send them out very far away from the mainland, like, whatever, like, that'd be fun. You get pools and movies. I've never been on a cruise ship. It seems like a floating hell, but...
I mean, they chose to get on it, so that's their problem.
But,
have another week.
Yeah, so it has been floated purely as an allegation, and this is totally spurious and potentially defamation, and I'm happy to fuel that. Sandy Logan has been following up some rumours across Twitter. We've seen it is alleged a Sydney federal politician, quote, used political influence to expedite the disembarkation of the Ruby Princess because they had some high-profile friends on board, unquote, which would be so unlike the Liberal government in any capacity to endanger the lives of poor people for the sake of their friends. That has no political comparison to Dutton helping keep his friends with, at best, indentured servitude. And it's a good time to mention that we are a comedy podcast and all of this is satire. I have no idea what's happening with sex slavery through North Queensland from any of our politicians. Probably nothing. Absolutely nothing. No. But we are not journalists and this is a comedy podcast.
Allegedly.
Really start to doubt the character of our leaders here.
Yeah, we can't get done for defamation because it would mean that someone would hear this and suddenly have a lower opinion of our politicians. But it's just it has been fucking insane to watch the numbers in New South Wales spike in direct, like, parallel with the Ruby Princess coming in and just sort of dispersing through. Like, the people on that cruise ship dispersed through the population just like the virus disperses through people's lungs. It was the exact same model. It was the exact same thing.
Model.
The Ruby Princess was a high viral load that hit the body of Sydney and just went through the arteries, the shithouse streets of Sydney.
We decided that was bad.
We live in a society, Evie.
Cruise ships are the virus. There's been this whole back and forth as well. So obviously, huge, terrible mistake to let people disembark without any kind of testing or quarantine or really any safeguards whatsoever. And so there's been this big back and forth between the two organisations that are plausibly responsible for this decision, which is Border Force at the federal level and New South Wales Health at the state level, who are the bodies that could have said, no, stay on the ship until a quarantine period has passed, or, come off the ship but stay in quarantine, any kind of safeguard like that. The two organisations that could have done that, New South Wales Health and Border Force, they have been engaged in this back and forth all week about whose fault it was. And I'm here to say it's both. It's straight up both people's
it's
fault.
It's both their fault.
Either could have stepped in, neither of them did. Both. 100% both. Blame is not a limited resource. Both. Full blame. 100%.
Yeah, it's not zero sum.
What galls me is this is the government that has such a hard-on for stopping immigration and border security. They just gave all the airport guards guns. They will lock people on islands at a moment's notice. And they're like, you know what, fuck them. Just give them a card at the airport. They'll do the right thing. Let them off the cruise ship. It's an honor system. It's like, okay, let's just admit you don't care about border security or stopping any kind of health thing. You just hate brown people.
Yeah, I remember Corey White used to have a joke about the government wanting to stop the boats, and he would talk about how he reckons there's a racial element to it, because I can't imagine Svetlana coming in from Sweden on a Viking longship being stopped at the border. And this is almost exactly that joke in real life, of just like it's literally our Prime Minister at the moment was the galling fucking idiot that had the gold little ship made into a small little statue that said, "I stopped these" on it. And we had the one boat everyone could agree needed to be stopped, not stopped at our border. It's so fucking immensely cosmically funny that he managed to fuck that up, which is, again, like we've said this entire episode, just how his career goes, I think. Like, it's just, that's how he bumbles through his life, of just like, he stakes a claim as being the one that stopped the boats. And then he turns out one of the defining features of his prime ministership is that he didn't stop any fucking boat that mattered.
Yeah. There's
well
also
done.
been, like, as the as the situation sort of develops and like cases started to come in based off the Ruby Princess there, where other ships were due to dock and have patients disembark, and even as cases of coronavirus were starting to be reported from the Ruby Princess, they were saying, we're still going to let those other cruise ships on. I think that they've subsequently announced that they're not going to do that, and they are actually going to quarantine those people as part of the larger border shutdown. But the fact that even as proven cases were coming in, they didn't jump on that and say, all right, we're going to change what we're doing. They were just like, I mean, no, it's always as much business as usual as we can conceivably get away with until we're absolutely forced.
It goes to show how much it takes this government to actually take a proactive, preventative stance on anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane.
So, shout-outs for this week. The Coles morning shift workers at a distribution centre in Victoria, that 80 of them walked off the job demanding additional safety measures against COVID-19. So we'll have this in the show notes. Again, the show notes are amazing. Get amongst them. But essentially, Coles workers who have been deemed essential by both Scott Morrison and the general public They essentially got jack of the situation at a distribution centre and just organised. They talked to each other and said, this is fucked, we're all scared, we want something better for ourselves, and walked off. And because Coles are in the midst of a profit boom because of all the panic buying, they fucking immediately acquiesced to their demands, gave them everything that they needed, and allowed them to come back onto the job site with safer conditions. They didn't even strike for a wage increase. They just went on strike because they're like, hey, we're scared of dying. We're not going to continue to work with the threat of death hanging over our heads. And Coles went, I don't know if we can help you. And they went, well, we're not working. And then Coles went, oh, please, 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 please. So shout out to them. Heroes.
Yeah. Congratulations, all the Coles people.
It's such a fantastic time for collective
Workers
bargaining.
have a lot of power right now.
I also want to give a shout out to the Australian Unemployed Workers Union. Like, we've shouted them out several times on this podcast before, but they have been doing incredible work over the last couple of weeks. I would put them as solely responsible for pushing the government hard on a lot of the changes to their policies for those who have lost jobs in the last couple of weeks. And I think they'll continue to push it further.
They're going to be the union we're mostly a part of.
I think the Australian Unemployed Workers Union is one of the most important organisations in Australia today.
And just as a reminder,
probably including the government.
Let's segue smoothly into actions. You can join a union without actually having to be in that workforce. You don't actually have to be a member of the specific. You don't have to have the job that is specifically covered by that union. You can just pay union dues if you want. I would very heartily suggest joining up to the Australian Unemployed Workers Union, especially because there's going to be so many people that are unemployed soon that can't afford to join. So if you still have a job and you can pay dues, I would heartily suggest signing up to them.
Well, the Unemployed Workers Union is free to join, even if you're a Solidarity member. That is, you have a job, you can, employed, unemployed, you can join the Unemployed Workers Union for free, and then if you have money to spare, you can also donate.
Just give money.
And if you have money to spare, you should. Not many people have money to spare, and the Unemployed Workers Union is probably, the main organisation in Australia that is looking out for the people who don't have money to spare at a large scale.
We don't usually insist on moral imperatives on this podcast, but if you have money, you should give it to them.
Another really quick.
You're morally obligated to do so.
As another an action. It was talked about fucking hand wave from Matthias Cormann in response to a question recently about eviction freezes at a presser on March 26th, so a couple of days ago now, which, again, this may change at a moment's notice, who the fuck knows. But he fell back on the line that, he's a federal MP, he fell back on the line that rent is regulated at the state level. So with that in mind, do a little bit of research, spend some time in an afternoon, researching who your the best representatives in your state parliament are, and hit them up about rent freeze and eviction freezes as well. So what we are going to be doing to that end is, as best as we can to help out, through the show notes, and hopefully by the time you hear this on a separate page, we're going to have a little thing set up with a template for an email that you can send, plus a couple of links that will help you look up your federal, state, and local MPs as well. Definitely worth time to send them an email. The smaller scale the government, the more likely you are to get a personalized response and to actually make a bit of a difference. So hit everyone up at every different level that you can.
Do you want to do some shout-outs to other media?
No! Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
The 7am podcast has done a coronavirus episode every day for this week, and they've done a lot of reporting through the last few weeks. As part of this recommendation, know your limit, but if you want to jack into the matrix of Corona, the first place you should go to is the 7am podcast, because they have some of the best non-hysterical information that you can
it's
get.
not hysterical, it's just people who know what they're talking about it. It's great.
Another really good shout out is Nina Oyama's Instagram. Nina.oyama is the handle. She has so many fantastic foul-mouthed infographics and pictogram shareable information bits on coronavirus. It's really good. It's really funny.
Yeah, she's awesome.
And if you or your housemates have gotten sick of Netflix, we can give board game recommendations on the quest.
Email us.
Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch, we are at NotGoodPod on all the socials, or you can email us at notgoodpod@protonmail.com.
Not Good Enough was recorded on the lands of the Kulin Nation, which we want to remind you was never ceded, and we want to pay our acknowledgements to their elders, past, present, and emerging.